This is not fair to you. This is page 28, but I want to read this a couple of lines because it goes to the intellectualism of it all. I'm, going through this, and I need you to interpret some of this. This is I just want to give you a little slice of this. Race conventions emerge as byproducts of the happenstance of observable morphological variability in human populations. Put differently, race matters in the equilibrium, as we economists would say, as a result of the inexorable logic of self-confirming feedback loops.
Yeah, sorry.
But what does that mean?
Here's what this means. Okay, observable morphological variability just means that there are differences among people in the shape of the bones in their face, the color of their skin, and the texture of their hair that can be readily observed. So we have these marks on our bodies. Now, my standpoint is that the marks on the bodies are in and of themselves of no significance. They don't connote lower intelligence or greater intrinsic athletic ability or anything. Nevertheless, marks on the body, the color of the skin, the texture of the hair, can come to have great social significance. Okay? That's what I'm talking about. When I say we attend to whether or not the eyes slant or are straight, whether or not the skin is pale or is brown, that we attend to that, we take note of it. When we meet a person, we don't fail to observe it. We file it away. And often our actions toward people are at least to some degree conditioned on those observations. What I'm saying is race is a byproduct of the happenstance of this differences in morphology. That those differences come to have significance can be rationalized by thinking in an economist-like way as the equilibrium outcome of social interaction. And that I try to explain with examples in the text. I'll give an example. The taxi example, I mentioned this in the context of D'Souza. So I say the following thing. I say, look, if you're waiting for a cab and you know that cabs are unlikely to stop for people like you, then you anticipate a long wait. Now, if you're a guy who's out to rob, a long wait may not be such a big deal. You only need one cab to stop and get in your day's work. If you're a guy who's just trying to get home from the movies, that a cab is not going to stop for you is a problem, and so you don't even look to take taxis in the first place. You take the bus or you bring your own car or whatever. Now, if most taxi drivers think that blacks are more likely to rob them, and so they won't stop for them, then most blacks who are just trying to get home will probably not rely on taxi transportation, or at least disproportionately they would be inclined to not do so. Whereas most blacks who have been on robbery won't be so much affected by the cab driver's slowdown. The consequence is that the cab drivers not picking up blacks creates a set of incentives, which, when African Americans react to those incentives, leads to the very circumstance that the cab drivers had feared and which justified their not picking up the blacks. That's the equilibrium that I'm talking about.
How often is that cab driver black thinking the same thing?
One of my points is that it doesn't matter whether the cab driver is black or white. This is rational human reflection, as D'Souza said. It's rational discrimination. But the end of the story is not that the blacks are thugs and the cab drivers are justified. The end of the story is a tragic happenstance in which the cab driver's perception that blacks are more likely to rob causes them to behave in ways that encourages the very selective reliance on taxi transportation by African Americans that gives credence to the cab driver's beliefs.
I kind of asked you this earlier, but I'll ask you again. How do you stop this?
Well, in the case of taxis, if you wanted to do something about it, you would have to interfere with the decision-making that individual cab drivers make by creating some kind of incentive or cost to them for avoiding one group versus the other. For example, you pass a law fining or in other ways imposing cost on cab drivers for not stopping, and then you'd enforce that law with, for example, sending out people to hail cabs and find out whether they're taking note of their numbers and so on like that. I'm not recommending that as policy. I think that, in fact, it would be a bad idea. I think in some instances you can't stop the consequences of this kind of reasoning with any kind of sensible policy. There are other instances, however, in which I think you can do a great deal. So another example that I give is that, well, people think that black neighborhoods are more likely to decline. They feel that if a few blacks move in, the neighborhood is likely to go all black, and then it won't be so nice a place to live. So when a few blacks start moving in, they panic and they sell and they move out. That's a self-fulfilling prophecy. They think the showing up of a few blacks signals the end of their tranquil domesticity, and in their flight, they produce the very circumstance that they feared. Well, it's easy to imagine policies that might be put in place to at least inhibit that kind of process, to give people more confidence, to not allow that kind of self-fulfilling feedback process to get going in the first place.